taking great personal risks in bringing you this information, but it must be done. I have absconded to the scenic autumnal backdrop, number one, because I love autumn, and that's all the reason I really need, but number two, because my lady recently moved in with me, and I'm thrilled about it, jazzed about it, make no mistake, but I have not yet told her about this whole thing. She knows about the Pokemon, just not this part of it. So, I have not had much time uh, for this area of my life. And then someone messaged me saying, Kev, the Pokemon world is on fire. Everything's collapsing around us. There was an election. Uh, ABR has put together some viability rankings. Um, uh, and the world cannot comprehend how he could rank T-Tar 11th or Salamence 38th or 39th, and how Blissey is number 1 and Dugtrio is number 2. Incidentally, by the way, that is all I know of those viability rankings. I clicked on Jimothy's video about how, he's gone insane. And, my instinct whenever someone says ABR's lost his mind, I'm like, no, he's just like that. I say with love, to be clear. Because I happen to agree with him on a great many things. And then disagree with him. When he says that he won't watch something if it's not on a streaming service he has, then my blood boils. The Hotline Miami soundtrack starts pumping in my ears, start seeing red. It's an ugly time. So, but on the Pokemon side, I happen to agree with him on a lot. So, with these viability rankings, I was like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. And again, I don't know what else he has done with them, but what I do know is that I believe he has done it. I know that I believe he has based it off his usage stats in the last however many months of tournament play. Okay. So my thoughts begin with the fact that I understand the idea of usage equaling viability. Some players have been very big proponents of it in the past. I remember Undisputed, who was one of the best advanced players for a long time. He played other things, but he really made himself known in advance. He was a big fan of it because he's like, dude, if people are spamming a certain, if people really think a certain thing is good, they're going to use it, right? Now, I understand where that comes from, at least from a personal, my own personal viability rankings point of view. Because if you think, like for example, my Snorlax usage would be, really low because I think it sucks, right? Yeah, so I don't fully agree with it, but I see the truth in it, that generally the best Pokemon are going to be used the most. So where I start to disagree with the idea overall, not saying I disagree with ABR or how he did it, just like with the overall idea that usage equals viability. I don't even know if ABR is saying that. I don't think he is. The idea of usage equaling viability, at least for an aggregate approach to the viability rankings project, which is what it is, then I don't think it really works because I'm not approaching this from a statistician's point of view. I remember my stats classes from college very fondly, but I have forgotten almost everything, even though I really enjoyed the process. But the point is more that when you look at something as would I use it a lot, yes, no, then it's not the same thing as it being viable, because theoretically something could be perfectly viable, perfectly very good, but it doesn't really gel with your play style. And then therefore it winds up being ranked, quote unquote, a lot lower than it would be, based purely off of viability. Like for example, I don't think Fortress is completely terrible. I rip on it a lot, but I don't think it's completely worthless. But I would almost never I don't even remember the last time I used a Fortress in advance. So based on that, then you see how Fori would be all the way at the bottom for me. So basically, I would not want to conflate viability rankings with usage statistics. If because at the end of the day, if you do viability rankings this way, as a person, it's not really viability so much as what I like to use. Which is an interesting project, but overlap. So, but other than that, I don't really see the issue with it. What I also thought was very interesting, and personally I really enjoyed this part, was I was reading the comments, which is my favorite pastime when I feel like torturing myself. And if you think YouTube comments about Pokemon are bad, you know what else I like to do? I like to read movie reviews online. It's horrible. And before I was into movies, I used to do the same with music. Yeah. So, I thought a person was coming. I was going to get ready to fight them. Because they probably, disagree with me on something. Topical. Yeah. So the idea being that people were, because I have long been a proponent of not really taking viability rankings seriously. Number one, not taking viability rankings seriously. And also, what was the other thing? Oh, it'll come back to me. But yeah, I've made many videos on this channel where like I'll go over viability rankings and what I think, but I also say at the beginning like a million times, don't take it too seriously. Whether Jirachi is higher ranked than insert thing that's close in ranking to Jirachi. If it's like one, if they switch places, does that really mean something? And it could mean something, of course, but it's more okay. Well, Jirachi has switched places with, let's just say, Celebi, right? Let's say they were right next to each other. Jirachi has moved ahead of Celebi. Celebi has moved ahead of Jirachi. Whatever it is, okay. Why is that? Don't take it as Jirachi is better than Celebi and Celebi's worthless now. Not even extremes like that. I exaggerate, but in a more practical, grounded kind of way. Think of it more like, oh, well, let's look at what's changed in the metagame to make people favor Jirachi more. Because it doesn't really mean, people say, oh, well, Celebi's not good right now. It was good before, now it's not good. I think that's nonsense. I think most of the time people are talking out of their ass, and there's a good reason for that, and we will get to that in the most interesting aspect of this video, I think. But even if it's not based in viability, it is based on roughly what people perceive as viability. So why do people think it's a certain way, right? And if you're saying, well, what's the difference? There was a period in advance many years ago where people were genuinely calling Salamence garbage. Based on off of a couple of months where it wasn't doing too well. It's like, well, clearly Salamence is not garbage. Clearly people were just not using it right. And, it's because a lot of it is based on the player base too. And you can say, oh, well, how can you divorce the viability rankings from, the player base that makes them? And I think there is a little bit, I understand the point. And, subjectivity, objectivity, things like that. But I think there is a sweet spot where, even if, the entire player base started, ripping on T-Tar, let's say, that would not change the fact that T-Tar is good in advance. It exists as its own truth. And, rather than get into that whole philosophical wormhole, I'll just leave it at that. Although if someone wants to keep it going in the comments, I would love to. I find this stuff fascinating. So, yeah, but before, other than not taking viability rankings too seriously, God's sake. Yeah. Okay. So yes, okay, I remember now. So I've not taken viability rankings too seriously. More of a guideline than anything else. And number two, I've also long been a proponent on this channel of play and team styles that enable such play that allow you to control the game. The game should be in your hands. You should be relying on your own play, right? And not to say that preparation and things of that nature. Excuse me, things of that nature are not important. Of course they are. But at the end of the day, I believe that the teams you bring should not be so reliant on what your opponent brings. It's unavoidable to an extent, but that extent should not be very large. You should generally have a team that can take on whatever the metagame is whatever your opponent's gonna throw at you, because the metagame is not that huge. You can make teams that do this. I don't really believe in the people who say, oh, well, not every team can cover everything, therefore just pick and choose. Letting too much rest on the matchup is not good. And the best players, the most consistent players, will generally bring teams that let them control the game, because then the game is in their hands. Because the stupidest thing in the world is to bring a team that's very matchup reliant, and then you lose to someone you could play circles around because you could do nothing against the Pokemon they brought. And as much as you think, oh, well, this player will not use this or that other Pokemon because of this or that other reason, that reasoning tends to be stuff we make up. It doesn't make any sense. And I'll give you a real example. My opponent has used Skarmory in 3 games so far, 3 out of 3 games. They will definitely use it again. Now, let's take the other side. My opponent has used Skarmory in 3 of their first 3 games. They will definitely not use it this time because it's been too much. You cannot base it in anything concrete. What you should do is just say, hey, I should probably be ready for Skarmory, not because my opponent might bring it, but because it's a good Pokemon. And before you think I'm making things up, that is a real, actual example. Both of those are real examples, both sides of it. The logic just doesn't work out. So you should focus on yourself and allowing your team to focus on that. So how is this is something I've stressed many times is why Skarmory's so reliable, why Blissey's so reliable. I think I made a video about why Blissey was so crazy broken in advance, or Wish Blissey or something like that. So this is something I've been preaching for a while. So okay, Kev, yeah, you've had your little sermon, whatever. Where are you going with this? Well, this is where I felt very vindicated, because I've read a lot of I've read a lot of pro-offense propaganda in advance recently, and it made me pretty annoyed because, yes, just because ABR used slacking does not mean that slacking is a good Pokemon all the time. I think people got a little too excited over that. Yeah, and that's why I was very vindicated, especially reading the comments, where people were like, "Oh my God, his playstyle is actually about controlling the game. It's not about leaving it up to whatever matchup is going to smile at slacking or whatever other offensive Pokemon. He really likes controlling the game. No wonder he wins so much, and just seeing them put it together was a thing of beauty, because it feels like I've been screaming into the void on this, where people are like, actually, offense is good because insert stupid fucking reason here. But then seeing, wow, that's actually, in fact, it kind of, was making my blood boil a little bit, just a little bit. Mostly because I was annoyed by something else on that day. But it was particularly interesting because they were going, oh, offense is actually good, ABR, are you slacking? And then you look at his actual usage / viability, and they say, wow, that's fascinating. He uses so much Dugtrio because it allows him to control the game. What a crazy fucking idea. I would have never thought to play the game that way. I'm being a little mean, but I was also, yeah. And that's why he uses so much Blissey, right? And why he thinks it's so broken. Which, this is why, even though I'm not fully on board with the viability equals usage thing, I completely agree on the Blissey front, at least, because Blissey destroys everything. I've been screaming this forever, and then people, I don't know, I think it's like the whole anti-defensive Pokemon bias that a lot of people have, where Stall is boring and stupid, and why don't you just use Dragon Dance like a man and other bullshit. Yeah, use Dragon Dance and lose like a man. Use Dragon Dance and get countered by Blissey. Anyway, so the point of this is that I've made my point. Okay, so the last part of this video that is the most interesting to me, because ABR is no stranger to speaking his mind, and even if his takes are scorching hot or ridiculous, which I respect, even if I disagree with the takes themselves, and sometimes I think they're just maniacal. But on this, I don't really have an issue with it, because I get it. It's based on usage, therefore, Salamence is 39th or whatever it is. Because if you're actually going to say Salamence is 39th because all these other Pokemon are better than it, then that's clearly but I'm not really interested in that, because that's not the point. Even ABR's rankings themselves aren't even the point. It's more what they're reminding me of, which is that I feel like we're entering, and actually, no, I take it back. I don't apologize for how pretentious this is going to sound. I think we're entering this kind of postmodern era as far as competitive Pokemon discourse goes. Yes, I said it out loud. Oh, that felt so good. What do I mean by this? Okay, so we're entering this era where it's getting... Well, to preface this, I've thought that people don't really care about the game in and of itself for many reasons, for many years. It's more of a social environment, so, the game almost becomes secondary, which is weird because a lot of the discussions revolve around the game itself, It's like, yes, we care about the game, but we don't actually care about it that much. And it mostly relates to tournament arguments, like best of 3 in SPL, which is another argument I had and lost recently for the millionth time. It was very sad. But you get the idea that, it's not just about making the game more competitive and things like that. Yeah, so... And a lot of what this means in practice is that a lot of the social aspect of the game winds up being around certain personas and posturing and, making a big deal out of yourself. This is why, someone can win one tournament game and then everyone suddenly thinks that they're the best player they've ever seen, mostly because that first player is bragging about themselves nonstop. And it's like, well, did you actually watch the game? That, it was pretty good, but, anyway. So point this being in this regard that a lot of people want to stand out in this social environment, right? I think we can all accept that as true. And so people have been much more hot take friendly in the last few years, and receptive to it as well. And I think it's because they like the excitement of the new more than, which is not inherently some sort of bad thing, but I think they let it override the actual merit of the take itself. Think of it like when you see someone bring a team to a tournament, right? And everyone goes, "Oh wow, that team looks so cool. That team looks so cool. It's never nothing like it has ever been used before." Then you find out nothing like it has ever been used before because it sucks and it loses to everything, right? But it's flashy and it has a bunch of colors we haven't seen together, so we associate it as cool. And that's mostly what I'm getting at here. That these players are often trading in these metagame opinions, because that's how, if you really want to know how well someone understands the game, talk to them about the game, right? Because any idiot can win in Pokemon with a good team given to them, go on a streak at the right time. But if they can, language barrier doesn't really exist. I've met players who can look at McMegan, and I'm ripping on him out of love, I promise. Also, his English is great now, but when he was first playing, like 13 years ago, his English was terrible. However, he never had an issue expressing himself on why something was good in the metagame. You ask him, hey, why is this good in this metagame right now? He would be able to tell you. So it's not a language barrier thing, if in case anyone's wondering that, because I've seen that argument used before. But if someone really understands the game, they can articulate it, right? So when you have lots of these discussions, people are trying to prove themselves by, oh, look how well I understand the game. And then the sensational statements start coming out, and everything does wind up being very sensationalized. And you could link this to like Smog Tours and people going crazy over a guy setting up Stealth Rock on turn 1. And less about the game, more about the spectacle, right? God, I gotta read Society of the Spectacle. That's what I was looking for in that bookstore earlier. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm trying to organize it. I wound up buying something way stupider, don't worry. Anyway, so the point being, that people are more and more susceptible, or more and more likely to like dish out some hot takes, especially if they're trying to make a name for themselves. I think there's two categories, without really thinking about it too much, but I think there's two categories just from observation and my feeling based on recalling those observations. Number one, there's the new player that wants to establish themselves, and they're like, yeah, that's right, I'm not afraid to say that XYZ, insert controversial thing here. And then the second category is the player that's been around too long, who's been discussing it too much. Now, I don't mean discussing it too much as in like, dude, go do something else, because no, that's not really the thing that I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is more that they've said T-Tar is number one so much, they're sick of saying it, so they think they start. I'm saying T-Tar number one as an example, by the way. But let's just say they've said T-Tar's number one so many times that they just got sick of it. And they're like, you know what, I'm just going to say something else just to say something else, as opposed to let's focus on something else that's interesting, or, just not talking about it, and you could start linking this to all kinds of psychological phenomena, like you feel like you have to participate in this, in your little subculture, but, you don't want to, whatever it is, before we get into, real ego analysis. But the point being that whichever side you fall on, then these sensational statements come out a lot, and it's not just ABR. I think like recently, I forget what it was exactly, but there was some stuff in GSC where I think someone said like Gengar was number one, and I'm a Zapdos number one truther, and even I was like, or truth, I think it's tied with Lax, which same difference basically. But yeah, I was like, I think Gengar's crazy good in GSC. I want to make a video about it, but yeah. And then someone was like, oh, Moltres is better than Zapdos in Advance, and there was a whole discussion about it. Anyway, so I see like hot takes like this more and more, and like, I am not opposed to a hot take. I am not at all opposed. In fact, I'm very pro. This makes me sound like a conservative nut job, just like, oh, well, I'm open to new ideas, but I promise it's not like that. I think if you look at my track record, you see that I have been a big proponent of like stuff that breaks new ground, challenges old ideas. I think challenging old ideas is good. Is T-Tar number one actually? Is it Skarmory? That I'm. Even if I don't even know if I agree with it anymore. I forget what it was because I haven't been participating. So I don't feel strong enough to have that opinion. I don't feel strongly enough to really have a worthwhile opinion right now. If you asked, well, you played Advanced for so long. Okay, I would still say T-Tar's number one, but I get it. I'm not going to say no if someone says Skarm is number one. And I think we're moving away from stuff like that into just more stuff that's just like nuts. Like, and I'll use another example. I think Hariyama is crazy good in advance. Crazy good being, extreme, but I love it personally. It would be very high in my usage. But I also recognize this is a specific ass Pokemon. This is not something you can slap on all the time. It requires a lot of support, requires a lot of good play. So therefore, it is not, and that kind of illustrates the viability thing. Like, yes, Hariyama would be very high in my personal usage, but because I like these kinds of teams, so I use them a lot. That does not mean, what does viability mean? Generally, it's use on different kinds of teams, ease of use, things like that. The more specific, the lower you get generally. Not that it can't be useful, but it demands more of the team, demands more of the player. The team builder and the player, which ideally should be the same person, but haha. Anyway, that's a whole other debate. So yeah, I think we're just going into crazy hot take land more and more freely because I think a lot of people get bored with the game itself. And it kind of goes back to that whole like, oh, stall teams are boring thing, or you've heard this one before, of course. Oh, the metagame's just the same Pokemon over and over. Personally, I don't mind that because there's always new, interesting ways to use those same Pokemon over and over. And also, okay, the same Pokemon are being used. What about the battle itself? That's where the interesting stuff happens. I could watch standard teams fight each other all day if it's between two good players, right? So ABR versus M Dragon or whoever, if they're just bringing the most standard things, not being creative at all, I don't care. I want to see how they're playing, right? So to me, that's the interesting part. But I think a lot of people are more interested in the, I don't want to say surface because it's a little condescending, I guess. The implication is a little demeaning, but I also have to pee, so we have to end this video. I'm not going to do it out here. My God, no. But yeah, that's I think that's basically everything I wanted to say anyway. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think of this, actually, of the whole ordeal and what I was going on about here. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one.